"I always knew he was cruel," she whispered, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's light as the room held its collective breath. "But I didn't expect him to humiliate me while I was carrying his child." The Elysian Hearts Gala wasn't just any event. It was the event where fashion met fortune, where secrets sparkled under the glow of champagne flutes, and where reputations could rise or burn in a single evening. Held annually at the Armandi Grand Hall, a place where even the marble stairs seemed to judge you, the night promised elegance, drama, and, this year, a public scandal no one would forget. Everyone important was there. CEOs, heiresses, fashion editors, politicians in disguise. The media swarmed the entrance, desperate to capture the arrival of Julien Duval, the city's most charismatic tech mogul, and the woman he was about to debut as his new fiancée. He didn't disappoint. Julien stepped out of a white Rolls-Royce dressed in a custom midnight blue tuxedo. On his arm was Dahlia Fontaine, reigning Miss Earth, model, influencer, and 12 years younger than his ex-wife. Her dress was a shimmering silver sheath with a slit high enough to make every lens zoom in. Together, they looked like a magazine cover, flawless, unattainable, dangerously proud. As Julien and Dahlia made their way down the red carpet, cameras flashed like lightning. Journalists shouted questions. "Julien, how long have you two been together?" "Dahlia, when's the wedding?" "Julien, will your ex-wife be attending tonight?" He smirked at that last one. "I doubt she'd show her face," he replied smoothly, not realizing that just yards away, that very face was preparing to make the most talked-about entrance in gala history. Inside the ballroom, the orchestra played a haunting melody, and guests whispered behind champagne flutes. Some discussed market shifts, others swapped gossip about who had Botox. But by 8:03 p.m., the room was collectively focused on one couple, Julien and Dahlia, holding court near the sponsor wall. "She's breathtaking," someone murmured. "Sure," another whispered. "Remember left Chloe? A week after their third failed IVF round?" The gossip was cruel, but accurate. 2 years ago, Julien Duval filed for divorce from his wife of 5 years, Chloe Marin Duval, less than a month after she miscarried their long-awaited child. No explanation, no goodbye, just a PR statement about growing apart. Chloe vanished. No Instagram posts, no press, no sightings. She became a memory the media moved past, a woman discarded when her fertility became inconvenient. Until now. At 8:05 p.m. the grand ballroom doors swung open. A hush spread like wildfire. There she was, Chloe. She walked in slowly, each step deliberate. Her black velvet gown hugged her curves and framed her very visible baby bump. Her hair was pulled into a sleek low bun, her lips painted a daring red, and her eyes locked straight ahead, unblinking. But that wasn't what made the room gasp. It was the man beside her. Gabriel Lancaster. Billionaire. Founder of Ascend Capital. The man who'd once refused a 60 Minutes interview and hadn't been seen in public with a date in over 4 years. His presence alone could double a stock's value. And right now, he was standing beside Julien's ex-wife, one hand resting protectively on the small of her back. Julien froze mid-laugh. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the marble. Chloe didn't flinch. A photographer, realizing the story unfolding in real time, snapped a shot that would later crash fashion blogs, tech websites, and gossip columns all at once. Chloe, pregnant, radiant, with a billionaire on her arm, and Julien in the background, wide-eyed, stunned. Gasps rippled. A socialite near the center whispered, "She came with Gabriel Lancaster? Isn't he? Yes, he's worth more than Julien. 3 times over." The orchestra stumbled over a note. Waiters paused mid-pour. Even Dahlia turned to Julien, her smile fading as her eyes darted between her fiancé and the woman he'd once left behind. Gabriel leaned in and whispered something to Chloe. She nodded, the corners of her lips lifting slightly, just enough to show strength, not spite. Her eyes never left Julien's. She was calm, dangerous in her calmness. Julien stepped forward, Dahlia still clinging to his arm. "Chloe," he managed, voice too loud in the suddenly quiet room. "This is unexpected." Chloe raised an eyebrow. "Is it? You didn't think I'd be invited?" Dahlia blinked, clearly not prepared for confrontation. Julien stammered, "I just meant, you haven't been seen in public for 2 years, Chloe said, cutting him off. "I was healing." A pause. Then, pointedly, "and building." Gabriel's eyes were on Julien now, sharp and unreadable. Julien tried to smile. "Well, Congratulations, I didn't realize you were expecting. Neither did you when you walked out, Chloe replied. The tension could be sliced with a crystal flute. Dahlia's grip on Julian's arm faltered. Chloe turned to Gabriel. Shall we find our table? Of course, Gabriel said, offering his arm. As they walked away, a woman near the press area whispered, Julian just lost the PR war. Another muttered, she upgraded, massively. The orchestra found its footing again, the music resumed, but the mood had shifted. No one was talking about Julian's new fiancée anymore. They were talking about Chloe, about the baby, and about the billionaire who walked into the gala with her like she was royalty. Because in that moment, Chloe Marin Duval wasn't just someone's ex-wife. She was the woman every guest suddenly wanted to know, interview, or invest in. And Julian realized, too late, that the real power in the room didn't come from beauty titles or tech empires. It came from resilience, from reinvention, from the woman he threw away, now reborn as the center of the storm. Before the tabloids called her the comeback queen, and before her image graced the covers of Vanity Fair and Forbes, Chloe Marin Duval was simply Chloe Marin Bennett. Quiet, soft-spoken, and so easily overlooked, she might as well have been invisible in a room full of power players. She wasn't born into wealth. She was born into survival. Her childhood was stitched together in second-hand clothes and Friday night freezer meals in a small Oklahoma town where ambition was considered arrogant and dreams were handed a waiting list. Her father worked double shifts at a steel plant until the accident left him paralyzed. Her mother cleaned houses and pinched pennies so tightly they squealed. Chloe learned early how to stretch a dollar, how to hold her breath when life got hard, and how to pretend everything was fine even when it wasn't. But she also learned to study, and she learned to fight, quietly, fiercely, the way women do when no one's watching. By 17, she had earned a scholarship to Northwestern University. She packed her entire life into one suitcase and boarded a Greyhound to Chicago with $62 in her pocket and a promise to herself she would never be small again. At Northwestern, Chloe majored in economics and minored in strategic communications. She worked 3 jobs: campus library assistant, weekend barista, and freelance copy editor. What she lacked in connections, she made up for in relentless discipline. She read case studies at midnight, studied boardroom psychology like it was gospel, and learned how to walk into any room like she belonged, even when her shoes were from Payless. It was during her senior year that she met Julian Duval. He was already making headlines for a mobile startup he launched out of his dorm. Charming, disarming, and arrogant in that intoxicating way certain men are when they know the room will applaud anything they say. Most girls wanted him. Chloe didn't. She watched, she studied, and then she challenged him during a Q&A at a tech panel. You're selling disruption, she said from the back row. But you're marketing dependency. Isn't that just rebranded exploitation? Julian blinked, caught off guard. Then he smiled. That night, he tracked her down at a bookstore cafe and asked her out. She said no. He returned the next day with her favorite caramel tea and a dog-eared copy of The Lean Startup, scribbled with Post-it notes. They talked for 6 hours. By spring, they were inseparable. Julian called her his brain trust. Chloe saw in him the kind of potential that needed direction. While he built apps and pitched to venture capitalists, she helped him refine his brand, shape his investor language, and map his long-term scale strategy. When he sold his first company at 26 for $22 million, he proposed. Not with a flashy ring or public fanfare. He did it in their cramped studio apartment over Chinese takeout, whispering, "You've been the reason all of this works. I want us to build something even bigger, together." She said yes. They married in a rooftop ceremony surrounded by fellow founders and future unicorns. The press called them the next Musk and Grimes, without the weird. Chloe hated the label but smiled anyway. She didn't care about headlines. She cared about building, about love, about legacy. But what no one saw, what Chloe tried not to admit even to herself, was how quickly things started to shift. As Julian's fame grew, so did his ego. The man who once kissed her forehead before every pitch began taking meetings she wasn't invited to. He stopped asking her opinion on launches. He started hiring advisors who looked like models and spoke in sound bites. At first, Chloe thought it was just stress. Then came the failed pregnancies. 3 in 4 years. Each loss chipped away at her soul like silent erosion. Julian was supportive at first, kind, consoling. But after the third miscarriage, something in him turned cold, distant. "You need to stop letting this define you," he said one night after she spent hours crying in the bathroom. "You're stronger than this. We have a company to run." They stopped trying. They stopped talking. By their 5th anniversary, they were strangers sharing expensive silence in a glass penthouse overlooking a city that no longer felt like home. And then, without warning, he left. No fight, no explanation. Just a text from his lawyer and a carefully worded press release. "We've decided to part ways amicably. We remain supportive of one another's ventures." Supportive? Chloe had built half of those ventures. She had stayed in the shadows so he could shine. She had sacrificed her body, her time, her name, and he replaced her with an NDA. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and insomnia. Paparazzi swarmed her. Friends disappeared. Her body still carried the remnants of a pregnancy lost too soon, and her inbox flooded with headlines about Julian's new luxury watch line and the supermodel he was mentoring. So Chloe vanished. She left LA, deleted her social media, moved to a quiet villa in Tuscany where no one asked questions. She wrote, she meditated, she planted lavender and read books under olive trees. Slowly, she stitched herself back together. And then something miraculous happened. She got pregnant, no treatments, no clinics, just life happening when she least expected it. She returned to the States in her 2nd trimester, determined to rebuild, not just for herself but for her child. She started consulting again, quietly, strategically. And one of her first clients? Gabriel Lancaster. They met at a private equity dinner. He had read one of her economic briefs and asked to meet. What started as a business partnership evolved slowly, respectfully, into something more. He wasn't loud. He didn't flaunt. He just listened, protected, understood. And he never once asked her to shrink. By the time the Elysian Hearts Gala arrived, Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just showing up. She was announcing her return. Not as Julian Duval's ex-wife, but as Chloe Marin Duval, future mother, economic strategist, and partner to one of the most powerful men in the country. The woman no one saw coming. The woman no one would ignore again. The Armandi Grand Hall wasn't just an event space, it was a monument to excess. It had once been a 19th century opera house, where European royals came to escape revolution and scandal. But now, reimagined by billionaire developer Alina Vasilev and dripping in gold-trimmed modernity, it had become Manhattan's most elite venue, where politics flirted with fashion and fortunes were made or ruined in a single conversation. Tonight, the Elysian Hearts Gala had transformed the hall into a temple of opulence. 10-foot crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from ceilings painted in soft ivory. The scent of white roses and sandalwood lingered in the air, blended carefully by a perfumer flown in from Paris. Waiters in tailored Armani uniforms glided across the marble floors, balancing flutes of Dom Perignon and trays of truffle-blended hors d'oeuvres. There were no normal people here. No plus ones who weren't at least minor nobility in some social sense. You didn't get invited, you got selected. And if you were seen here, you didn't just exist. You mattered. It was where Chloe Marin Duval had once walked beside Julian as an accessory. Now she was about to walk in as the main event. Earlier that evening, the ballroom had buzzed with predictable displays of wealth. Hedge fund kings comparing yachts, venture capitalists bragging about crypto rebounds, and media moguls trading gossip about a fallen A-list actress who'd gone spiritual. Everyone sipped and smiled while watching each other from behind the safety of champagne flutes. In the center of it all stood Julian Duval, glowing with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He was dressed in a custom-made tuxedo from Savile Row, his hair trimmed to precise imperfection. On his arm, as everyone already knew, was Dahlia Fontaine, 25, flawless, and a walking advertisement for cosmetic symmetry. She was the kind of woman who didn't walk into a room so much as float. "Miss Earth 2024, someone whispered behind a sequined clutch. Still feels like a PR stunt. Julian didn't care. Tonight was about image, control, redemption. 2 years ago, when the divorce drama had unfolded, he'd taken a hit. Stock price dip, investor uncertainty, awkward boardroom glances, but he'd rebounded. Publicly at least. And tonight, Standing beside a beauty queen in the city's most exclusive gala, he believed the narrative was his again. Until the doors opened. Chloe walked in, not with a whisper, but a wave of silence. The ballroom didn't gasp, it held its breath. She had timed it perfectly, as if she'd studied the rhythm of the room, waited for the music to soften, for the media to focus on Julian, and then, boom. Entrance. Her gown was custom Dior, black velvet with a neckline that framed her collarbones like sculpture. A diamond bracelet shimmered subtly at her wrist, discreet, devastating. Her baby bump about 5 months along was visible but styled like a centerpiece. Powerful, undeniable, proud. Beside her, Gabriel Lancaster looked like power dressed in human skin. His charcoal tuxedo was minimalist, sharp, designed to say one thing: I don't need to impress you. I already won. The crowd didn't whisper at first, they just stared. Because nothing said scandal quite like a billionaire sponsor turned protective partner. From the corner, the gala's host, a socialite named Morgan Delacourt, nearly dropped her wine. Is that Chloe Duvall? Someone confirmed. And Gabriel Lancaster? Together? God, Julian's going to choke. Across the room, Julian's expression cracked, if only for a second. He tried to play it cool, lifted his glass, smiled, but his eyes didn't blink. He watched as Chloe and Gabriel made their way toward the main stage, where the evening's biggest donors were gathering. Dahlia felt it immediately. Julian, she whispered, tugging on his sleeve. Are you okay? He nodded once, too quickly. She's just trying to stir drama, he muttered. Ignore it. But no one was ignoring it. Not the press, not the board members, not the women who had once smiled politely at Chloe and now rushed to greet her like royalty. Chloe, you look radiant. My God, who's your stylist? Congratulations on the baby. She thanked them all with grace, never once faltering. When someone asked who the father was, she simply smiled. I'm blessed, that's all that matters. Gabriel said nothing. He didn't need to. His mere presence did the talking. As the gala continued, the attention shifted, not toward the charitable cause of the night, but toward Chloe's reappearance, her elegance, her silence, her strength. At 9:15 p.m. the dinner was served. Gold leaf risotto, microgreens flown in from Kyoto, and dry-aged filet mignon. Julian tried to engage with donors, but every conversation ended with, "Did you see Chloe?" He clenched his jaw. He had spent a fortune crafting his image, only for it to crumble in under 5 minutes, because of a woman he had once dismissed as too soft to survive PR warfare. But here she was, thriving. Gabriel leaned into Chloe between courses. Would you like to leave? He asked gently. She glanced around, noticing the cameras still watching. No, she said. Let's stay a little longer. I'm enjoying the show. Near the dessert bar, Dahlia overheard someone whisper, She's glowing. And that man, Gabriel? That's not just a rebound, that's a statement. Dahlia's throat tightened. She turned to Julian. You didn't tell me she'd be here. I didn't think she'd show. She's pregnant. I can see that. And she's with Gabriel Lancaster. I said I see it. Dahlia blinked, the mask of confidence slipping. Do you still have feelings for her? Julian stared at his untouched wine. I didn't know I did, he said quietly. Until now. Dahlia stepped back, and for the first time that night she realized something terrifying. She wasn't the main character, she was the plot device. Chloe wasn't just back, she was winning. Julian Duvall had always believed he was untouchable. From the moment he built his first tech company in a grimy Chicago basement, Julian operated under one principle: win at all costs. He didn't just want to be rich, he wanted to be admired, envied, feared, and for a long time he was all three. He was the kind of man who turned IPOs into personal victory laps. His confidence wasn't just visible, it was weaponized. His handshake closed deals, his smirk made competitors flinch, and his name? It was a brand. At 32, he was already on the cover of Forbes. They called him the Kingmaker of Silicon Avenue. At 33, he was marrying Chloe Marin Bennett, the brilliant, humble woman he claimed kept him grounded. But grounding wasn't what Julian craved. He wanted launch pads. In the early years, he hid his arrogance behind affection. He bought Chloe flowers after investor meetings, told her she was his anchor, and praised her insight during strategy sessions. Behind closed doors, he listened to her. Publicly, he took the credit. She didn't mind, at first. Chloe wasn't after the spotlight. She believed in him, supported him, trusted that her loyalty would be enough. But Julian was evolving. The more successful he became, the less he saw Chloe as a partner, and more like a piece of decor. She was smart, sure, but not loud enough. Not sharp enough for press events. Not brand forward enough for his growing public image. "She's too soft," he once told a colleague after Chloe quietly exited a launch party early. "We need someone who knows how to own a room." That was when the distance began. He started inviting publicists, influencers, and rising models to the same dinners Chloe used to attend. Slowly, she was edited out of his professional life. When she miscarried their third child, Julian didn't even cancel his trip to Davos. "She needs space," he told his assistant. "I'm not helpful when she's like this." He sent flowers and didn't call. He rationalized it all. He wasn't being cruel, he was being focused. Visionaries didn't slow down for personal setbacks. They pushed forward. When he filed for divorce, Julian didn't cry. He didn't hesitate. "She'll be fine," he said to his legal team. "She's strong. She'll land on her feet." What he didn't admit, what even he hadn't fully processed, was that Chloe had seen through him in a way no one else ever had. And that terrified him. So he cut the cord before she could hold a mirror to his ambition. He expected her to spiral, to fade. Instead, she vanished. No drama, no scandal, just silence. Julian moved on, publicly anyway. His next girlfriend was a 24-year-old interior designer who lasted 6 months. The one after that was a Brazilian actress whose English vocabulary peaked at baby and yes. They all came and went. Pretty, shiny, temporary. And then came Dahlia Fontaine. She was perfect, on paper, beauty queen. TV appearances, huge Instagram following. She made Julian feel powerful again. People noticed them. They were photographed. He liked that. Liked the way she looked at him. Liked the way others looked at them. He thought he was back on top. Until the night of the gala. Until Chloe walked in, pregnant, with Gabriel Lancaster. It was the first time in years Julian truly felt outmaneuvered. Not just because Gabriel had more money. Not just because Chloe looked more radiant than he remembered, but because she didn't look at him like she needed anything. Not revenge, not closure, not even acknowledgement. That indifference was devastating. Suddenly, Julian felt exposed. He thought back to all the times he'd minimized her. How he told their friends she wasn't built for business. How he criticized her for not dressing the part. How he once mocked her for crying after a failed pitch, saying, "You're not fragile, stop pretending to be." Now, the fragile one was him. Dahlia sensed the shift. In the car after the gala, she confronted him. "You're still in love with her." Julian didn't deny it. He stared out the window, watched the city blur, and muttered, "I don't know what I'm feeling." "You lost her," Dahlia said flatly, "and now she's winning." He didn't respond, because deep down, he knew she was right. For the first time in Julian Duval's life, he wasn't in control of the story. He was the story. The ex-husband who left his wife and got replaced by a billionaire. The man who traded brilliance for beauty and got outclassed on every level. And now, the world was watching. Chloe had expected whispers, even stolen glances. But she hadn't expected this. The moment she stepped away from the main hall and into the intimate sponsors' lounge, where high-tier donors mingled behind velvet ropes and custom cocktails, the temperature dropped. Not literally, but socially, as if someone had dimmed the lights on her presence. Eyes flicked, smiles tightened, conversations paused mid-sentence, then resumed in careful, stilted tones. Gabriel noticed it instantly. He placed a steadying hand on the small of her back. "They're uncomfortable?" he murmured. Chloe nodded. "Let them be." But just as they moved toward the champagne bar, someone blocked their path. Dahlia Fontaine. She stood there, radiant in a champagne gold gown that shimmered like frost. Her expression was poised, but behind the poise was something cold, sharp, and calculating. "Oh," Dahlia said with a sweet smile. "You must be Chloe." Chloe gave her a polite nod. "Dahlia." Julian, trailing just behind his fiancée, looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. He kept his distance, but didn't interrupt. He didn't have to, because Dahlia had an audience now. People had begun to gather subtly, pretending to sip drinks or admire the sponsor board while clearly watching the interaction unfold. The energy crackled, like everyone sensed a scene was about to erupt. Dahlia's voice was syrupy, too controlled. "I just wanted to say, you look brave. It's not easy showing up in your condition, especially in such a fitted dress." Chloe kept her gaze steady. "Pregnancy isn't shameful, Dahlia, and Dior seems to agree." A few heads turned. A quiet chuckle slipped from somewhere in the crowd. But Dahlia wasn't finished. Of course, it helps to have support. Emotional? Financial? She said, casting a glance at Gabriel. Though I've always believed a woman should stand on her own. Chloe tilted her head. You mean like earning your title in front of 6 judges instead of thousands of users on TikTok? A sharper laugh this time from a fashion editor sipping gin. Dahlia flushed but smiled through it. Julian stepped forward, finally. All right, enough. But it was too late. The scene had been set. Dahlia dropped her smile, voice louder now. I'm just saying, it's a little convenient, don't you think? You disappear for 2 years, come back pregnant, and suddenly you're on the arm of a man who could buy this entire building. That's not a glow-up, Chloe. That's strategy. Silence. Cameras didn't flash, but you could feel phones recording discreetly. This wasn't just drama. This was spectacle. Chloe's heart pounded, not from fear, but from something deeper. A line had been crossed. She took a breath. Convenient? She said calmly. You mean like being crowned Miss Earth thanks to a brand deal your manager slept for? If the room gasped, Dahlia paled. Julian stiffened. Gabriel stepped forward now, not to defend Chloe, but to stand beside her, silent, unshaken. I didn't come here to fight, Chloe continued, voice low but firm. But let's be clear. You can flaunt your ring and your title. You can show off your gown and your Botox. What you can't fake is substance or class. And judging by the fact that you're still threatened by a pregnant woman in flats, well, I'd be worried too. With that, Chloe turned and walked away, Gabriel following without a word. But just before the ballroom doors swung shut behind them, Dahlia's voice rose again, desperate, shrill. At least I didn't trap someone with a baby. That was it, Julian spun. Dahlia. No, she snapped, stepping forward. Let's talk about it. She shows up here, like some phoenix, pregnant, glamorous, unbothered, and we're all just supposed to forget what happened. She didn't trap anyone, Julian said through gritted teeth. And if anyone should be embarrassed here, it's you. The crowd froze. Dahlia's face collapsed. You're defending her? I'm asking you to stop humiliating yourself, Julian hissed. Dahlia stared at him, then turned to the crowd, who now looked at her with a mix of pity and discomfort. She tried to laugh it off, tried to fix her hair, but the damage was done. Meanwhile, Chloe stood by the elevator, her hands trembling ever so slightly. Gabriel leaned close. You okay? She nodded. Let's leave. They exited together, into the cool night, into a city that suddenly felt like hers again. Back inside the ballroom, no one was watching Julian anymore. The cameras had already followed Chloe. The elevator doors closed with a soft chime, shutting out the buzz of the gala. Chloe pressed her back against the mirrored wall and exhaled, shaky, shallow, like she'd been holding her breath the entire night. Her heels wobbled beneath her, even though they were sensible by red carpet standards. Her hands trembled. She wanted to cry, scream, or curl into herself and disappear. But she did none of those things. Not yet. Gabriel stood beside her in silence, respectful, as always, but his eyes were sharp with concern. You were incredible back there, he said quietly. Chloe nodded, forcing a smile. Thank you. But inside, she wasn't proud. She wasn't composed. She was unraveling. The doors opened to the underground valet level. Gabriel's driver stood waiting beside the sleek black Maybach. The chill of the night wrapped around Chloe like a warning. The silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was deafening. They climbed in, and as the doors shut, she finally exhaled for real. And then the tears came. Silent, hot, relentless. She didn't sob. She just sat there, staring out the tinted window, tears streaming down her cheeks while the city blurred past in neon streaks. The buildings she once admired now looked like glass cages. The streets, once familiar, suddenly felt hostile. Gabriel reached for her hand. She flinched. I'm sorry, she whispered. I need a minute. He nodded, letting go instantly. When they arrived at her building, Chloe climbed out before he could open the door. The doorman greeted her politely, but she barely registered it. She stepped into the elevator of her penthouse residence, one of Gabriel's properties, technically, and watched the numbers climb. When the doors opened, the space greeted her in silence. High ceilings, marble floors, a baby grand piano, luxury, security, isolation. Chloe walked straight into the bathroom and stared at herself in the mirror. Her makeup was still flawless, set to survive HD cameras and artificial lighting. Her hair was intact. Her gown clung perfectly to her body. She looked powerful, but she felt like a child. She pulled off her earrings, tossed them on the counter, then sank to the floor. Her hands cradled her stomach instinctively, protectively. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her baby. "I didn't mean for tonight to go like that." The gala had been a success in the eyes of the public. She'd made her entrance. She'd put Dahlia in her place. She'd stood tall next to a man worth more than Julian could ever dream of being. But the pain, God, the pain, still clawed at her. It wasn't just about Julian. It wasn't about the insults. It was about the weight of the past 2 years finally catching up to her. The loneliness, the trauma, the whispered fears. She was pregnant, alone, in the spotlight, and despite Gabriel's kindness, despite the power she projected, she was terrified. Was she strong enough for this? Would the world ever let her move on? Was she just playing dress-up in a life that didn't quite fit? Her phone buzzed on the counter. She ignored it. Buzzed again. Reluctantly, she checked. "Gabriel, I'm downstairs, just in case." Chloe stared at the message, torn. Part of her wanted to let him in, to lean on someone, anyone. But the other part of her, the one that had been abandoned, lied to, and discarded, couldn't trust anyone fully. Not yet. Instead, she typed back, "I just need to sleep. Thank you for everything tonight." He didn't respond right away. When he finally did, it read simply, "Gabriel, I'm here, whenever you need. No pressure." Chloe turned off her phone, stripped off her gown, and slipped into an oversized hoodie. She stood in the nursery, still unfinished, staring at the pale walls and unopened boxes. She hadn't even picked a name. She hadn't let herself get that far. Everything felt fragile again. She lay down on the bed, curled onto her side, and stared at the city lights. Sleep didn't come easy. When it did, it was restless and cruel. Dreams of Julian throwing her out in the rain, Dahlia's voice like a blade, headlines flashing, "Ex-wife returns with a bump and a billionaire." On every screen, she woke up gasping, alone. Sunlight bled through the curtains. It was a new day. But the ache hadn't gone. And she knew it was time to face herself before she could face the world again. The morning after the gala, Chloe stood barefoot in her kitchen, holding a steaming mug of chamomile tea and staring out at the skyline. She hadn't slept well. Her mind replayed every second of the night, from Dahlia's venom to Julian's stunned silence. But beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Not fear, not anxiety, power. For 2 years, Chloe had hidden it, even from herself. But now she was done hiding. She picked up her phone, opened the encrypted folder labeled Maverick, and scrolled past dozens of sealed contracts, trust documents, and digital certificates. Then she tapped on a file titled Holdings Overview, C. Duval. Her real portfolio. She stared at the numbers, still surreal, even to her. Net worth, $812 million. Assets, 27 global investments, 4 silent board seats, 3 charitable foundations, and a controlling interest in 2 tech accelerators, one of which Julian had pitched to 6 months ago, unaware she was one of the anonymous gatekeepers who rejected him. That had been no accident. What most people didn't know was that Chloe hadn't disappeared after the divorce. She'd evolved. When Julian left, Chloe had collapsed emotionally, but not financially. What Julian never realized was that Chloe had quietly been investing since her university years, not in stocks or crypto fads, but in people. Women-led startups, education platforms, emerging medical tech. She had never wanted the spotlight, but she was brilliant at recognizing value and nurturing it until it bloomed. Gabriel had been the first to find out. It happened 6 months earlier during a boardroom meeting at a private equity event in London. He was speaking about legacy investments when Chloe, attending quietly as a consultant, challenged one of his points, articulating in exact detail a pattern in the firm's international portfolio he had never noticed. Afterward, he asked to see her background. She handed him a business card with no title, no logo, just a private email. He did his research. What he found floored him. A woman with no public digital footprint who had moved millions behind closed doors, created incubators for refugee entrepreneurs in Spain, funded clean water systems in Cambodia, and never once asked for credit. She wasn't just intelligent. She was the kind of brilliant that made billionaires nervous. That's when Gabriel offered her more than partnership. He offered protection, discretion, respect. He never asked for her story. He waited until she was ready to tell it. And this morning, Chloe was ready. She sat down at her glass dining table, opened her laptop, and clicked send on a press release she had drafted and saved weeks ago, unsure if she'd ever use it. Subject line: Chloe Marin Duval launches $100 million women's equity fund, backed by anonymous billionaire collective. The byline was subtle, understated, no mention of Julian, no mention of Gabriel, but it was enough. Within 2 hours, media outlets were buzzing. Forbes, Business Insider, TechCrunch. Even the New York Times ran a feature. The silent powerhouse returns. Chloe Duval steps out of the shadows. Julian saw it while eating breakfast in his corner penthouse. His assistant rushed in, phone in hand. "Sir, you need to see this." He scrolled, froze. That photo, Chloe in a power suit, one hand on her baby bump, standing in front of a massive digital screen with her fund's mission statement lit up behind her. Julian dropped his fork. "What the hell?" Dahlia peeked from the hallway, still in her robe. "Is that about your ex?" "She was never supposed to," he muttered, voice low, seething. "She wasn't supposed to outplay me." His phone buzzed again. An investor, then another, then 2 board members. They were all asking the same thing. "Why didn't you tell us your ex-wife was sitting on that kind of power?" Julian stared at the screen and realized too late that Chloe hadn't just come back with a baby and a billionaire. She had come back with her empire. 3 weeks after the gala, Chloe stood in front of the mirror in the penthouse dressing suite at the Conrad residences, watching the transformation unfold. Her reflection didn't just look different, it looked final. Gone was the soft brown hair that once framed her face in quiet waves. In its place, a sleek jet-black bob, sharp, structured, cut at an angle that made her cheekbones pop and her jawline scream authority. Her stylist, Claudette, took a step back, pursing her lips in admiration. "This is not a makeover," she said. "This is a declaration." Chloe smirked. "Exactly." The dress was custom Alexander McQueen, deep emerald, structured shoulders, high slit, a silk belt that cinched just above her baby bump with unapologetic precision. No ruffles, no pastels, no attempt to soften her pregnancy. She wasn't hiding her power anymore, she was dressing it. The press had started calling her the Velvet Billionaire after the launch of her fund. Her story had gone viral, not because of scandal, but because of strategy. She hadn't responded to gossip, hadn't mentioned Julian, and hadn't given interviews. She just made moves. Powerful ones. Since the announcement, Chloe had closed 5 major deals, invested in 2 female-led startups, and bought back shares in a fashion tech company, one that had dropped her as a brand ambassador after her divorce. And tonight? Tonight was her first public reappearance since the gala. The event was hosted by Bloomberg Private Wealth, a closed-door conference for high-net-worth investors and entrepreneurs. Normally, the guest list was reserved for men in gray suits and women in muted pantsuits who played nice. Chloe was not playing nice. She arrived in a black Bentley, stepped out without a handler, and let the cameras feast. Photographers scrambled, reporters pushed, and for once, no one cared who Julian was dating. The moment Chloe walked into the building, heads turned. She glided through the lobby like she owned it, and in a way, she did. Gabriel had recently acquired a stake in the hosting firm, and though he wasn't present tonight, everyone knew exactly who she represented. Not as a wife, not as a side story, but as a force. Inside the ballroom, executives buzzed in corners. "Is that really her? She looks lethal. She's 7 months pregnant and still shutting down rooms. Jesus." Chloe didn't flinch. She walked directly toward the first investor she needed to meet, Anton Bellini, the elusive Italian financier known for only backing visionaries. He turned as she approached, his expression neutral, until he saw her. "Miss Duval," he said, extending a hand. "Or may I call you the Phoenix?" Chloe laughed softly. "Only if you're planning to invest." He smiled. "I already did." Their conversation lasted 11 minutes, long enough for her to secure his vote on an upcoming expansion fund. By the time she turned away, 3 other investors had already lined up to speak with her. The rest of the evening unfolded like a symphony she had orchestrated. No drama, no questions about her past. Only respect, only power. At one point, a journalist from the Wall Street Journal approached her, recorder in hand. "Miss Duval, may I ask, what changed? What sparked this version of you?" Chloe tilted her head, calm. "Nothing changed," she replied. "I just stopped asking permission." The quote was printed the next morning. Front page of the business section, above the fold. Julian saw it while scrolling on his tablet. He nearly dropped his coffee. His fiancée, now downgraded to off and on, was in the kitchen, arguing with her agent about an expired endorsement deal. But Julian didn't hear her. He was too busy staring at Chloe's photo in the paper. She looked untouchable, unreachable, unapologetic. He remembered the last time she wore heels like that, at a product launch years ago. He'd made a comment about how maternity clothes could still be sexy, and she had smiled politely. That smile was gone now, replaced with steel. Julian leaned back, the truth sinking in. He hadn't lost Chloe to Gabriel. He'd lost her to herself. The summit was hosted at the Ritz Grand in Geneva, a once-a-year convergence of tech CEOs, global financiers, and world-class innovators. It wasn't televised, but everyone who mattered was in the room. Chloe stood backstage, a sleek earpiece clipped to her ear, the production manager whispering final cues. She wore a navy power suit, tailored to accommodate her growing belly, yet sharp enough to make every executive in the room sit up straighter. This was her moment. Not a comeback, a claiming. Gabriel stood beside her, dressed in classic Tom Ford. He wasn't here to take the spotlight. He was here to witness. "You're ready," he said simply. Chloe nodded once. "I was born ready." On the other side of the curtain, the moderator was introducing the next speaker. A former strategist, now founder of one of the most disruptive equity funds in the world. Please welcome Chloe Marin Duval. Applause erupted. She stepped onto the stage. The lighting caught her perfectly. Her heels clicked across the lacquered floor like punctuation, and the room, filled with billionaires, journalists, and Julian Duval, held its collective breath. Julian hadn't expected her. He was seated near the front, Dahlia nowhere in sight, flanked by board members of his latest venture, Hyperlens, a tech startup desperately seeking funding after its last product flopped. Chloe reached the podium, glanced at the sea of tailored suits and gold watches, and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "Let's talk about power. Real power." For the next 15 minutes, she delivered a keynote so precise, so surgical in its insight, the moderators forgot to cut her off. She spoke about equity, manipulation in startup valuations, and how women founders were often undercapitalized by men who claimed to champion diversity, while secretly gatekeeping opportunity. She didn't name Julian. She didn't have to. At one point, she referenced certain companies that used image-based AR to manipulate consumer tracking data. Tech Julian's company had been exposed for misusing last quarter. Gasps. Julian stiffened. Then she clicked the slide. Behind her appeared a graphic timeline showing how Chloe's fund had invested in a competing AR tech, one that had outperformed Julian's by 87% since launch. She looked directly at him. "We don't bet on boys with toys," she said. "We invest in builders." The room erupted into applause. A few rows behind Julian, someone whispered, "That's her ex, right? Damn." Julian's throat tightened. He looked at his team, two of whom were now looking at each other with uncertainty. When Chloe left the stage, the energy shifted permanently. No one was talking about Hyperlens anymore. They were talking about Chloe. Outside, the press had already picked up the story. "Chloe Duval destroys industry bias in 15 minutes flat," was trending on X. Photos of her side profile, fierce and graceful, spread like wildfire. Julian ducked out the back of the ballroom, ignoring the call from his PR rep. He needed air. Instead, he found Gabriel waiting near the valet. "Leaving so soon?" Gabriel asked. Julian clenched his jaw. "Enjoying this, huh?" Gabriel's smile was polite, measured. "I didn't come for revenge, Julian." "No? Then what do you want?" Gabriel's gaze sharpened. "I want Chloe to never have to explain herself again. I want people like you to stop mistaking quiet for weak. And I want you to know, you didn't lose her to me. You lost her when you stopped seeing her." Julian didn't respond. There was nothing to say. By the time Chloe stepped outside to meet Gabriel, photographers swarmed. Flashes popped. She stood beside him, glowing, unfazed. One reporter shouted, "Miss Duval, any comment on Mr. Duval's company after today's summit?" Chloe turned slightly. "I hope he innovates something better next time," she said. "We all grow at our own pace." Click, click, click. The shot of her and Gabriel walking away hand in hand became the most shared image of the week. Julian, watching from a distance, knew exactly what it meant. She hadn't just moved on. She'd leveled up. 2 months later, Chloe sat on the balcony of her Santa Barbara estate, the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly before her, soft waves breaking against the cliffs below. She wasn't just living in peace, she had earned it. Her baby boy, Ezra Marin Duval, slept quietly in the bassinet beside her. Gabriel was inside, cooking breakfast. Yes, the billionaire knew how to make French toast, and the sun had just begun its lazy climb across the sky. But Chloe wasn't thinking about money. She was thinking about legacy. The past year had rewritten her life. From walking into that gala as a symbol of scandal, to standing on international stages, rewriting the narrative about power, gender, and what it means to come back stronger. Her inbox was now filled with stories from women. Entrepreneurs, single moms, cancer survivors, caretakers, women who had been silenced, betrayed, dismissed. They weren't just inspired, they were activated. And today, Chloe was finally ready to speak. Not through investment reports, not through fund launches, but directly. She opened her laptop and began to type. Open letter. From one woman to every other who's ever been underestimated. To the girl who stayed silent to keep the peace. To the woman who kept showing up even when no one clapped. To the mother, the daughter, the survivor, the dreamer. This is for you. You don't have to explain why you stayed, or why you left, or why you broke. You don't have to apologize for healing slowly, for loving hard, for believing in someone who didn't believe in you. I once loved a man who told me I was too emotional to be taken seriously, who said my softness made me fragile, who whispered that I was his anchor until he saw me as dead weight. I once lost everything I thought made me valuable, my marriage, my title, my direction. I broke quietly, but I rebuilt loudly, not with revenge, but with vision. I invested in women who had nothing but dreams. I poured my pain into purpose. I stopped shrinking to fit in rooms that weren't built for me. And when I walked back into those rooms, I made them mine. So here's what I want you to know. You are not small. You are not inconvenient. You are not too much. Your scars don't make you broken. They make you proof. Proof that you endured, that you outlived, that you chose to rise when the world bet on your fall. Let them talk. Let them gossip, underestimate, roll their eyes, then let them watch. Because someday, you'll walk into a room they told you you'd never deserve, and they'll have to adjust their tone to say your name. And when that day comes, smile, not because they finally see you, but because you never needed them to. With love, Chloe Marin Duval. She hit publish. Within 30 minutes, the post had gone viral. Celebrities reposted it, politicians quoted it. Women from every industry stitched their stories to hers, like threads in a tapestry. And Julian? He read it from the silence of a Malibu rental, alone. He didn't call. He didn't write. He didn't dare interrupt the peace she had built. He just sat there, reading the words of the woman he had once labeled too soft, and understood, at last, that he had never really known her. Back in Santa Barbara, Chloe closed her laptop and lifted her baby from the bassinet. She held Ezra close, pressing a kiss to his tiny forehead. You'll never have to ask the world for permission, she whispered. You'll inherit it. Gabriel stepped onto the balcony, handing her a plate of golden toast and a soft smile. Ready for your next meeting, Miss Duval? He teased. Chloe grinned. Always. Because this wasn't her ending. This was her beginning. So the story has ended, our wonderful friends. Are you still here right now reading these last words? If you are, then maybe, just maybe, something in Chloe's journey stirred something inside you. Maybe it was the pain she carried so silently. Maybe it was the moment she chose not to shrink. Or maybe it's the hope that even when everything falls apart, you can still rise, louder, wiser, and more powerful than ever before. Because the truth is, this wasn't just a story about an ex-husband, a beauty queen, or a billionaire. This was a story about reclaiming your voice, about rewriting the script others tried to write for you, about the quiet resilience of women who've been silenced, sidelined, underestimated. As Chloe showed us, being soft doesn't mean you're weak. And being underestimated? That's not an insult. It's a setup for a stunning comeback. Maybe you've been where Chloe was, abandoned, dismissed, watching someone else steal your spotlight. And maybe you've wondered, is this it? Is this all I am? But here's the truth that matters. You are not broken. You are becoming. The world has a way of making women feel like they need to apologize for everything. Too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too ambitious. But what if you're too much is exactly what this world needs more of. Chloe's journey reminds us that you don't have to beg to be seen. You don't have to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. You can build, you can lead, you can walk away from what hurt you and walk right into what heals you. One line from heterodox philosophy I keep returning to is this: we heal not when we return to what broke us, but when we build where we were burned. And Chloe? She didn't just rebuild, she created an empire from her ashes. So if you're watching this right now, if you felt small or invisible or silenced, this is your call to rise, to speak, to build, to choose yourself fully. If Chloe's story moved you even just a little, drop a comment below and tell us which moment hit hardest. Like this video if you believe in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe, because every week we bring you stories that remind you how powerful healing can be. You're not alone. And your story? It's just beginning.